And good afternoon, everybody. And again, welcome to number 3. We're just going to give everybody a few more minutes after 4 o'clock here to kind of sign in, get in through the waiting room and into the webinar presentation room. So if you just bear with us just for a few minutes, we're going to give everybody a chance here to kind of get queued up and booted up. A couple notes for everybody today. We have 3 J70 experts, and we'll introduce them in just a moment to give you their thoughts and ideas about some downwind sailing tips. Couple unique things happening for us here on the East Coast of the United States. We have a fairly spectacular wind event going on right now. Gusts 40, 50, 60, 70 knots, depending on where you are. And so we're fully hopeful that our internet's going to hang in there, but we kind of have a plan B, C, and D if it doesn't. But in any case, if one of us cuts out, you'll know that it's probably due to wind and not that we don't want to be here with you guys. So again, just going to wait for a moment or two as more folks kind of get out of the waiting room and into the webinar presentation room. And again, we do appreciate you spending a little bit of time here on J70 Monday here with North Sails. While we're waiting, we can just again remind everybody, it's a great time to join the class. And as you can see, we have the link to get to the J70 class membership. If you haven't joined and listened into our first 2 or 3 webinars, we're not doing a great job of getting you convinced to do it. So hopefully today's the day that after today's webinar, you can click over and make sure you're joining the class. The class supports J70 sailing throughout the world, and it's a great time to make sure we're supporting the class. With that said, what I'm going to do is introduce today's moderator and kind of the host, and he's been helping out with a bunch of these. Allan Terhune, a multi-class champion.
I think we lost Brian there, but I just wanted to say good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our 3rd J70 Monday. And we're looking forward to having a good talk here about downwind moding and downwind speed on the J70. So I'm joined here today by 2 of our J70 experts. We have the president of North Sails One Design and a past J70 world champion, Tim Healy, who's with us. Hello, Tim.
Hey, Alan.
Hope all is well with you. And we have the current world champion and one of our sail designers for the J70 class in England, Ruairidh, who's also with us.
Guys.
And we're really looking forward to having a good talk here about downwind moding. And we're going to jump right into it pretty quickly here. So we're going to chat about some light air, you know, the barely sailable conditions, and Rory's going to lead us through this talk. So Rory, take it away.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, so, you know, we've all been out there in our J70s, and although you might not start a race in quite the super light conditions, often we find ourselves sailing in those conditions where the breeze is dropped by the time we all get to the windward mark, or there's a big fleet causing a lot of blanket. So it's important to understand the subtleties of how to get these boats downwind in less than 6 or 7 knots of wind. The objective really, when it gets that light, is absolutely to keep the boat moving. It's very easy to try and sail a bit too low to try and get towards the leeward mark. But if you let the boat slow down too much, then it can take a long time to get going again. And you could be a little bit of a sitting duck in the water. So the real objective, as I say, is to keep it moving. And the secondary objective is to try and be able to get low and get down towards the mark. So here we have a nice picture, you know, some guys sailing on Lake Garda and some pretty light winds. First point is in order to get the weight as far forward as we possibly can to try and reduce wetted surface, you know, to try and reduce drag from the hull by lifting the stern clear of the water. We can see a couple of guys at the front of the boat, you know, making a real effort to get their weight right up to the mast or to the shrouds. think possibly that the helmsman might be able to do a slightly better job of getting up to the winch, or possibly even in front of the winch, you know, if you've got an extendable tiller extension. Also, when it's super light like this, the wind obviously doesn't have a lot of energy to fill the sails. So a little bit of leeward heel so that gravity helps to fill the sails. Therefore, the wind that is blowing over the sails has a much better chance of staying attached to the sails the whole way around and then getting off the sails cleanly. And that's a real, you know, real key point in how to sail the boats in very light winds, or how to sail any boat really downwind in light winds, is to make sure that the wind has the ability to stick to the sails all the way around and get off the sails cleanly. As the spinnaker is really the main, or the biggest sail on the boat, everything is geared around trying to make the spinnaker as efficient as possible. So it's important that the main is trimmed in a way, and the jib are trimmed in a way that that enables that. So you see here, the main sheet is actually trimmed in quite a long way with the bang eased, so that the wind is able to get off the mainsail. Backstay all the way off, and jib furled, all very, very key points. Tim, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, or any.
Yeah, I do. I think the other points to make looking at this picture is you can see the water. It's like glass. It's flat. The boat's not pitching around. It's not moving or shaking a lot. So I'm looking at the trimmer who's sitting on top of the cabin house. His weight's quite, you know, high compared to everybody else. So in this condition, that's probably okay. If there was any kind of chop or the boat was pitching around or shaking, I would encourage that if you wanted to trim the spinnaker from that position, or if you were the crew member in that position, to stand on the cabin sole. Class rules limit how far you can go into the cabin. I think it's your shoulders and your head have to be above the cabin house there.
Yeah.
But just try to work and get your weight as low as possible if there's any kind of chop. And I also, I'm looking at the sail plan, and the mainsail, to me, looks like there's not enough twist. So what's going on there? Maybe the main sheet is trimmed a little too tight. Maybe the vang is just snugged up when it should be loose. But those are the things to look at. And I agree with you 100%. The helmsman should be forward, at least pushed all the way up against the winch, if not sitting in front of the winch to keep the weight forward.
Yeah,
So
I think that totally makes sense. Why don't we move? We have a good video here to talk about some light air sailing with these two boats and chop, and you guys can talk through this as we show the video here.
Yeah, so this video is the other extreme state, sea state. You know, as you'll see once it gets going here, that there's quite a bit of chop and swell. And it's the key here is to keep the boat moving, but also to stabilize the rig. And so how do you stabilize the rig in this condition? So what I would do is put a little bit of backstay on to keep the rig from moving fore and aft and stabilize the rig that way. I'd pay attention to how much vang tension I have on to make sure there's enough vang to control the boom from moving too much, but also to allow the upper leech to twist off. And you can see the boat with the whale on the spinnaker. That's John Baxter. You can see, you know, in my opinion, they did a nice job setting up the mainsail there. There's enough twist in the sail that you can see that the upper leech is open, but it's also not flapping around or moving around too much in the chop. So it seems like a good, flexible, forgiving setup on the main. And then the other key point I wanted to make, looking at John Baxter with the, you know, the closer boat, is that how much they're moving the weight around in the boat. And they're taking the opportunity when they have the wind and they're on the right part of the wave, to put a little bit of weather heel in and pressurize that weather side. And you can see that crew on the leeward side of the boat, he'll move from his sitting up on the tank to scooching in, and then even leaning to weather at times to flatten the boat some, and just taking the opportunities now and again to flatten the boat. And you know, one thing I've learned in this condition is it feels really good to sail with heel. And the helm feels good. You feel like you're going fast. You should be going fast, but you're not sailing as deep as you can because the boat is not flattening out and allowing the boat to drive down at times. So if in this condition you ever feel like you're not sailing as low as the boats around you, put a little bit more pressure up on the weather rail and it'll allow the boat to drive down at times. Ruairidh, do you have any other comments?
Yeah, one thing I really like about watching the boat with a whale on it here in this video is they've actually got the main trimmed in towards the center line a lot more than the other boat. And what that's doing is it's just allowing the air to get off the back of the spinnaker. So the spinnaker actually is the sail that's much more efficient and more stable, because this is obviously conditions where it looks like the sea state's actually going in the opposite direction to the wind here. So it's really a very confused, tricky setup. And with the main being that little bit further in, the spinnaker is working more efficiently the whole time. And also when they get a little bit of pressure and a little bit of gust, the extra main in tips the boat over and actually gives the crew something to bring their weight up against. And then that squirts the boat forward, allows the helm to then sail a little bit lower, and they can then put their weight back into the side. So I think, yeah, everything you said was absolutely right, but I really like the main sheet or the main sail setup on this boat and on the boat astern. I think that's why it's you know, slowly reeling the other guy in throughout the duration of that video.
Yeah, and from the spinnaker trimmer side of the house, that's normally what I would be doing. In this condition, it feels like it's really easy to want to over trim the kite because the waves are causing it to you know, move so much. You almost think the sail is curling, and it actually probably isn't. And you can see there's a tendency on other boats where people just keep over trimming the kite and the boat just drastically slows down. So just constantly letting the sail, you know, breathe in this condition, it's hard to do, but it seems like it's really necessary.
Yeah,
especially when it gets really choppy like that.
Do either of you guys ever tighten the jib sheets? I'm never really a fan of it, but to stabilize the rig, I see. I mean, Tim, I think, mentioned the backstay there a second ago.
Yeah, I would just snug it up. I wouldn't put any real tension on it. I would snug it up, and then I would pull the backstay on a little bit. And then I'd pick my times because, you know, in this condition that we're looking at, there might be times where the breeze comes up a little bit. Everything stabilizes for 30 seconds or a minute, and then I could ease the backstay off. That allows the rig to go forward a little bit more, allows the spinnaker to get deeper and sail with deeper angles. But anytime I feel like I have to bow up or any kind of chop in that situation, I just pull a little backstay on, let everything stabilize and keep the rig from bouncing around.
Yeah, Rory, I think that's a good question. For me, I always feel like I'm afraid you're going to mess the jib up when you do that.
Yeah, that's the killer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Put all the load into the luff of the sail because you're just tightening the furl.
Right.
The other thing worth sort of mentioning, because I mean, this is pretty, unfortunately, the Worlds over in LA have been postponed, as we all know, for 12 months. But, you know, this sort of video, this is pretty indicative of that sort of venue, isn't it? Is this sort of conditions we can expect?
Yeah, I think it's very similar. You know, swell, chop on top of that, and kind of light to moderate breeze. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a pretty decent rolling swell there. So we did get one other question about positioning in front of the mast and if people are allowed to stay there. And if one of you two want to take that question real quick, because it was in the other photo.
Yeah, so I forgot to comment on that. So that lured crew in that other photo was definitely pushing the limits, and we had a discussion about that. If it was the angle of the photo, if he was really in front of the mast. So the rule is you can't position yourself in front of the mast. So that's the class rule. And if that person was, set up in front of the rig there, that was too far forward. But we thought maybe because the angle of the picture was taken, it looked like he was forward of it, or it was just the way the photo was taken. So yeah, you go forward, but not in front of the mast.
Got it. So it seems like the next, fairly common mode that we sail in, especially on the East Coast from time to time, is this Displacement Soak Mode. So I think Tim wanted to chat about this a little bit.
Yeah, so, this is a mode where you're going in between, digging low, possibly occasionally lows back into VMG mode, but trying to get as deep as possible when the pressure allows. And so, a few things looking at these photos. One, weight is still far forward. The top photo, I think, shows a really good form there with the crew pushed up against the bulkhead of the cabin, and the helmsman looking forward. And what this does is allows the crew, you could see two crew looking back, one crew looking forward, trimming the kite, and the helmsman looking forward. It lets the crew looking back call the puffs, let the helmsman trimmer know what's coming so they can anticipate it a little bit, and then use their crew weight to move in and out and use their crew weight to steer the boat. So a little puff comes and they might lean in towards the middle of the boat, and the helmsman knows at that point he can drive down. Same in a light spot. If they want to help the helmsman steer up, just lean back and lean out and try to encourage the helmsman to steer back up again. And all the time, the helmsman's looking forward to where he's going, and the trimmer is saying, I've got good pressure, or light pressure, need to come up, and come up 1 degree, come up 2 degrees. And he can reference, the helmsman can reference how much to come up and down. So it's really about the communication there. And the bottom photo, you can see very similar. There might be a little bit more wind, and the crew now is pressuring up the weather rail even more. And at that point, you're in soak mode and you're thinking about, what do you do to stay low and maintain your speed and possibly sail lower than the boats around you. So, weight forward, we touched on, keep the boat flat to help the helmsman drive lower. You could actually at times put in a little weather heel there. Pick your times to do it. Back stay off, of course. At this point, you want the rig as far forward as possible to get a nice deep spinnaker. Playing the vang in the puffs, making sure that the upper reach of the main doesn't spill open and lose power. And you can actually put it on a little bit in those puffs. And then the tack up. So the tack up is, that's important when you can consistently keep the bow down. You're not in traffic. The sea state isn't so confused that the spinnaker is really jostling around. And what I like to do is let it up between 2 and sometimes even 6 inches. 6 inches is maximum, but that's when the sea state is fairly flat, or at least predictable. And I'd like to get low, and what that does is it allows the spinnaker to rotate around to the weather side. The luff of the sail rotates to the weather side of the boat, and you can sail a little bit deeper. And I'd say it's a fairly temporary mode, but if you don't want to go wing on wing at that point, or there's traffic around you and that mode is the right lane to be in, or keeps you in the right lane, then tack up and rotate the luff of the sail around. A little bit of weather heel might be the right way to go.
Got it. Well, we have a good video here to show some of this displacement mode sailing here. And Rory, maybe you can talk through a little of this.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. This video shows that, the classic J70 conditions, 10 knots of wind, and just the slight swell and chop that brings with it. So I think these guys doing a nice job boat pretty flat. What I like is, you know, really the ones that are in control of the heel are the guys sitting to windward. So you see the guys to leeward, they don't really move so much, but the guys in the middle and the spinnaker trimmer, rather than saying he wants to head up, he's just able to roll his body in to generate a bit more heel, and then the helmsman naturally, you know, feels the boat want to come up and does it. And then when he steps up to windward, the boat comes down. They certainly are pretty active with crew weight and sail trim here. I don't know if you guys got any view on that.
Yeah, I think these guys are pushing the limit on the, you know, moving around. But, you know, I think they're picking their time. They're choosing the right wave to flatten the boat on and pressurize and sync with the helmsman. And I think the key there is that at times they're surfing down these little waves, and they're accelerating, and they're picking, you know, they're just picking the right times to do it. So it's the communication. Clearly these guys are practicing, and they're just trying to get synced up with each other to do it. And whether it would work in a race environment, you know, with other boats around you, you know, possibly at times they're turning the boat too much up and they're losing, you know, height to somebody who kept their bow down. Might be VMGing better. But I think the idea here is, you know, work with your team and try to get that communication down so that you are coordinated with the trimmer and the crew weight, and also the helmsman understands what the next move's going to be.
Yeah, I think that's really important to talk about because, you know, when I'm the trimmer on the boat, we sailed in this condition quite a bit on the Vineyard Vines boat. And for us, one of the things that's super important is communicating, you know, what modes we're trying to be in and trying to limit John from steering. So if I'm telling him we're pressured up and we're trying to bear off, I will lean back and I can get the other guys in the boat to move with me. And if I'm saying sheet is light, we need more pressure, I'll just move into the boat instead of waiting for him to push the tiller. And that way he's not overreacting. If we're talking about it constantly, it kind of, you know, this video exaggerates it a little bit, but I think it kind of shows the point of how the trimmer can help dictate what they're saying instead of waiting for the driver to push or pull. I mean, if you look at this video, I mean, Claudia's barely steering the boat at all, but you can see they're making pretty radical turns. Again, you know, they're practicing this, but you can see it's very little helm movement. And I think this is where the trimmer and the rest of the crew, if they communicate well and are pretty active about it, and when I say active, it's not rule breaking necessarily, but just being aware of what the boat is trying to do, you can go quite a bit faster in this condition, I think. We did get one question about your previous question or point, Tim, about the tack up. And the question was, you know, do you let the tack up when it's choppy, or is that a flat water thing? How do you decide what's stable enough to do the tack up mode?
Yeah, so it has to be windy enough. I would say, you know, over 8 knots, 9 knots, you know, any condition where you would wing, you would also do the tack up. And yeah, it destabilizes the spinnaker. So that's a good question. If it's choppy and the spinnaker is shaking, yeah, I wouldn't do it. But Key West, you know, is a environment where you could do it. You could have nice regular waves and be able to do it and surf the waves down. But if you introduce chop and you have to go bow up at all, it doesn't work. So it has to be a kind of a bow down and keep the bow down and have enough wind to do that. So primarily, you know, I would say light to moderate sea state. I wouldn't do it in anything real choppy.
Yeah, for me, Tim, I think basically if tack of the spinnaker goes to leeward in any way, that's indicating it's not the right mode. The tack wants you to go up or slightly to windward of center line. So I think that's a pretty good trigger for you know.
Yeah, I agree with that.
People, if you go to leeward at all, it's not right at all.
So I think one of the cool things about the J70, we've talked about this all the time, is that there are so many different options in moding, right? And one of the, the hot topics for the J70, which we'll get into now, is wing-on-wing sailing and how you guys approach that, because there's so many variations of it, when to do it, how to get on the wing, how to get off the wing, so many things. So I think Rory was going to tackle this beginning of this part here about talking about the wing-on-wing.
Yeah, I mean, it's become a real hot topic in the class over the last couple of years. It started off as people introduced as a little bit of a tactical tool, but now it's become, actually there's a range of wind speeds and sea states where winging is the fastest way to the lured mark, which is obviously what everyone's trying to do. So understanding when and how to do it and the subtleties of it is become a big part of the game. And it comes at a point where, the previous video we just saw, if the wind speed comes up that little bit more, the spinnaker trimmer is saying, I've still got good pressure, you can come down. I've still got good pressure, you can come down, you can come down. And then all of a sudden, the spinnaker just collapses. You lose all load in the sheet, and basically what's happened is the spinnaker has got in behind the mainsail. Mainsail steals the air from the spinnaker, it stalls, and you lose it all. But when you get into that sort of condition, that's perfect example of when you can be wing. You want to get the two sails spread apart so that they're not stealing each other's air. So when you like that, generally, certainly the trend for a long time was to get into that mode would be to go boom over first, but it's becoming much more common practice to go spinnaker over first. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But the techniques, once you are in a wing, is you're trying to keep the sails spread and presented to the wind as wide as possible, because we're now virtually pointing dead downwind. So we're just trying to maximize drag rather than lift, which is sort of counterintuitive when sailing. But think of it much more like symmetric spinnaker, where you pull the pole back and you're just trying to spread the spinnaker as wide as you can. So we're aiming to try and get the weight as far forward as possible. But the hard thing is for the trimmer or the driver, they've got to try and hold the sheet out on the windward side. And if you go too far forward, it's very difficult to do that, because as you go forward, you're essentially pulling it back into the center. There's a little bit of a compromise in terms of weight forward. But as far as the hull goes in the water, we're definitely still trying to get forward so that we maximize the waterline length. So you quite often see the two front guys as far forward as they can go, and then whatever your crew makeup happens to be dictates the rest of your fore and aft. The lighter the wind is, or towards the bottom end of the range, the sort of more windward heel you require in order to keep the spinnaker clue from falling back in towards the center line. Again, try and use gravity to help keep the spinnaker spread wide as it gets lighter. As it gets a little windier towards the top end of the range, if you have too much windward heel, the boat you'll require too much helm, so the boat naturally won't want to go straight and actually starts to become quite unstable, and you start to pendulum backwards and forwards, and that's when things can get a little bit scary. Obviously, with the mainsail, we're trying to let it out as far as we possibly can to try and present as much mainsail to the wind as possible. So the boom will be virtually out touching the shrouds. And with the J70 is a huge amount of spreader sweep. So when you have that, the shroud up high is trying to invert the top battens. So careful adjustment of the vang is very important. Always trying to ease it, but if you ease it too far, the top battens will invert, and you'll actually have, the top of the main will be essentially spilled over and makes the boat a little bit more unstable. Another key point is, backstay absolutely all the way off. You're desperate to try and get the masthead as far forward as you possibly can. And then another point I've just put on the slides here is, is to really keep an eye on the masthead Windex. Make sure it's really kind of pointing dead astern. Once you're pressured up towards the bottom end of that range, you might be slightly how to describe it, but sailing slightly higher. So, you know, you're almost at the point where the spinnaker's trying to come back into towards the center line. And as it gets lighter, as it gets windier, you can come down a bit more to your really, you know, on the 180 highway, going dead downwind, or even possibly if there's a little bit of chop, you can go by the lee now and again to try and just maximize the surf and, you know, naturally let the boat just go dead downwind, you know, towards the mark as quickly as possible. You guys, Al, you got any, you know, you trim the
Yeah, I mean, I think from the trimmer standpoint, there's a couple key things. One is for me is on the communication part. And I try always to say, you know, turn left, turn right, because it can get very confusing on up or down, where if you're in normal mode, you might say up one, down one. Whereas in this mode, up and down could get confusing pretty quick when all of a sudden sails are switching sides and you know, it all happens very fast. So that's one of the things I try to work on pretty hard. And then remember, when it starts to collapse, you actually have to ease the kite forward, not trim it. And that's a common mistake you see is, you know, you see the curl starting to happen on the leech end there. And some trimmers trim it thinking, you know, it's curling, and it's actually the opposite. When you're on the wing, you have to ease and get it forward. But the trick is not to get it too far forward because it'll fly around the bow of the boat. So it's a pretty fine line of pushing down and then managing that curl with help of steering actually does better sometimes than trimming, in my mind.
Yeah, I think the key to when it collapses is to try and understand why it collapsed. Because if you're too high and the clew blows in, you can actually see it physically, the wind pushing the sail into the center line, then you were too high. If the sail, sometimes it just stalls and collapses, and that's generally an indication that you're too low, and it's actually the mainsail air, or the air coming off the mainsail that stalled the spinnaker. So I think that's, you know, always good communication. I like certainly my trimmer to be talking about this is the left most we're going to go, and this is the right most. We're now pushing it, so, you know, if anything, we're turning left from here or turning right. Is really important.
Yeah, and the boats that I sail on, just to address that, the boats that I sail on, when we start talking about the trim of the spinnaker when we're on wing-on-wing, is when it tacos, right? When the clew folds towards the tack, that usually means the helmsman's too low and you have to turn up. And when you start getting the leech curl, like you would on a traditional symmetrical spinnaker, that means that the helmsman's too high, or like Al said, you have to ease a little bit on the sheet. So if you just think about it in those simple terms, it helps the communication on the boat, and so that the helmsman can react quickly. And you'll see in this next video, I think both of those situations come up,
Right.
And you have to react pretty quick to keep it going.
Yeah. So one quick question that we have for you guys, and we can talk about it as we transition here to the video. We got two. One is, do you ever let the tack up when you're on the wing-on-wing? As a quick question we got. I don't know if Tim if you want to address that.
I'd say no. I mean, Ruairidh hit it when he said you want to expose as much surface area as possible at this point. And I'd say no. If there's enough wind, you know, typically over 8 knots, no. You tack down and expose as much area as possible.
And then the other question I got, maybe, and Rory, you brought this up, so I'll let you answer it, is someone asked real quick, is how much you think the batten tension affects it when you're going on the wing? You talked about the vang causing the battens to invert. Could the batten tension have anything to do with that either? And we don't need to talk about it a ton, but just.
No, not really. I think you have to set the batten tension for the correct amount of tension. You wouldn't just set it because you were going to be winging that day. But the more tension you have, the more compression on it, the battens are going to want to stay in whatever setting they're in. If you've got too much batten tension, you might struggle to get the battens to pop back the way you want it without having a huge oversheet of the main in order to do that, which then disturbs the spinnaker. You send dirt air into the spinnaker. So short answer, no.
Yep. So we got a couple of videos here that we're going to run through. So this was from a training session from the Worlds in Marblehead, and I was on the Nova Mar boat where we're practicing with the Vineyard Vines boat here. and we're doing actually spinnaker over wing setup. So I don't remember which one of you guys said you wanted to talk over this, but we'll let one of the two of you jump in here and talk us through what's happening here in this video where we're doing a spinnaker over. Maybe Tim, take that part.
Sure. So yeah, this definitely has become way more popular and recognized as an easier way to go to the wing, less disruptive, is pulling the spinnaker over first. So it takes a commitment down of the helmsman to get the boat down far enough, and then as the sheet comes across, the spinnaker starts to fill, and it's almost like you have to do a slight overturn down to get the spinnaker full, get it to fill and move in front of the boat a little bit. Then you can turn back up again to the right angle, and it's really just temporarily down a little bit too far, but that's a safer way to do it than not heading down far enough.
Got it.
Yeah, I think that the spinnaker over early works when there's definitely enough pressure to do the wing. If you're marginal, your bottom end of the range, then I find that the boom over method gets you into it nicer. But, you know, I think everyone will continue to develop those techniques when we all get back on the water and get sailing again.
So this part right here, you just saw a view of the trimmer actually leaning up and sitting on the stanchion or the lifeline, and we all spoke about that beforehand, and for sure that's illegal. You can't get up on and sit on top of the lifeline like that. Way safer is just be sitting on the deck. It won't attract any attention that way, and you'll be sure to keep your torso inside the boat, which is the key part of it. So just wanted to address that as you see that trimmer kind of sitting up on the lifeline there.
Yeah, that's me. You caught me,
Nice
Tim.
job.
Thanks. No, and it was good that we actually we talked about that when we were doing it. That was one of the worries that we didn't get caught for that. Thankfully, we didn't. But it was kind of one of the values of having this video. Actually, is we didn't notice it until we saw it on camera. So that was really good.
You can see right there, then they're escaping out of the wing by doing a left turn, boom over maneuver. And I think what Allan's comments were about, right turn, left turn, when you make a maneuver, especially in traffic, it's the same kind of detail that you're talking. The tactician has to explain right turn, boom over jibe, or left turn, boom over jibe, or, spinnaker over jibe with a right turn. And that way people understand which way we're turning and which sail is switching sides. And I think that's, super important, especially when boats are starting to come together.
Yeah. I think this video is showing that you can do both methods really nicely. We've seen nice examples in that video of both methods where I'm sure the boat speed barely changed throughout the over. I think they did pretty nice.
Then we have one more video here. This is from really early on in J70 sailing. This is Tim doing a boom over wing here in Key West. So if you want to talk us through this a little bit, this would be really, really good.
Yeah.
Here we go. Oh, and I messed it up. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so yeah, this was Key West, obviously beautiful conditions, probably around 10, 12 knots. And, one thing I want to point out there is the turn and then grabbing the main sheet and popping the battens through. So this is something that the helmsman can really concentrate on, is making the turn, not overturning, but committing to the turn so that the boom comes over. And then as the boom comes over, grabbing the main sheet and just giving it a simple, one tug pop before you sit down on the new weather side. And that just eliminates the hassle.
See if I can show it again. Yeah, trying to show it again for you.
Yeah, so grab it, pop, and then sit down. And that saves all that commotion on the back side of it with the crew trying to flip it through with the vang. Now, the other important part of this is as we're doing that, the crew is putting a lot of tension on the vang. So if the vang's loose, it almost doesn't matter what you do, the battens aren't going to pop. So vang's got to come on hard, right in that maneuver, pop the main sheet, and then sit back down again. And that way, like I said, after the fact, you're not having to deal with the battens. And now we're doing a, left-hand turn kite over. This is, one of the more difficult maneuvers just because the spinnaker has to come all the way across and fill again. And so that's a hard one to escape out of the jibe. But Allan, you had a good technique for doing that one, getting the kite over jibe.
Yeah, so one of the things that, as you can see in this video, when it happens, the spinnaker trimmer actually reaches back here and grabs the now lured sheet, but the loose sheet by himself, and he starts overhauling. And what we've started doing is actually having, the next person forward grab the soon-to-be new sheet so it overhauls quicker, and then the spinnaker trimmer would actually kind of ease the sheet through so the kite gets through quicker. And if you watch on the video, it takes a little bit of time for the kite to get through, and the boat's already heading up. This one's actually better. Later in the video, you'll see another one where it just helps get through a little quicker. But you're right, Tim, this is the hardest one to do well. But when you do it well, it's pretty effective because you can get a good roll and a flatten out of it, and the boat goes pretty quickly out of it.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It doesn't matter how you split up the job, but if the trimmer either passes off the old sheet and then just 100% focuses on the new one, or he's holding the old one and somebody else is overhauling the new one, if you split that job up, it makes it way easier.
Right. Here, we're going to show this again.
Main in is another key to it, just making sure that because sometimes you have to sheet the spinnaker in a long way, and if the spinnaker leech or the clue crashes into the boom because the boom wasn't adjusted, then that doesn't help you either. You want to sheet the main in so that the spinnaker can come through clean, get the air off the back of the spinnaker, and head off on the new jibe.
Right. Well, we'll show again here. And this is, one of the questions we got is executing this transition from the soak mode to the wing mode, which is basically, I'll say in this part of the video is what you're doing, right? So yeah. We'll go through this again, but this is the boom over wing, which was, I would say, earlier on was probably the more popular of the ways to get on the wing. And it's probably now becoming 50-50 of whether you spinnaker over or boom over, but this is definitely the traditional maneuver. So we can watch it one more time and add more points to it as we go.
So one thing is for sure, just watching the bow person, he was grabbing the vang and just banjoing it. So he was just holding it and banjoing it through that maneuver. And that allowed, that leech tension so that I could just, it may be just stopping the boom for a split second is all it takes to pop the main. But also the important part is committing to the turn, but not overturning. And there's that same maneuver with the spinnaker over.
Sorry about that. I did it again. This thing doesn't like me today. It was right about here.
Yeah, the spinnaker trimmer also does a nice job in those boom overs of keeping the clue outboard. Because when you do the boom over version, like we're seeing here, the air moving across the spinnaker has to change direction. So normally it goes from luff to leech. Obviously, when we're winging, it's going from leech to luff. But here, you can see the trimmer holding it out, so the air's got a chance. When the new air starts hitting the stick and trying to blow the clue in, he's physically holding it out there. And once it gets settled, you can, there's not so much load on it anymore. It wants to sit out there like we are now. But just through that transition, the trimmer does a real nice job of making sure it stays out there. Which is another key if you're doing the boom over version.
Yeah, my one big takeaway after watching this video was how aware, when you watch these boom over maneuvers, there's another one coming here, how aware Tim is of the angle of the boat, and you can see how quickly he makes the corrections on the helm to make sure the kite stays at its optimum angle. He does, as he mentioned, the aggressive turn to get the boom through, but then he's quick to get the boat back onto its angles. So A, he doesn't give away too much height, and B, the kite stays full. So it's really important. If you watch him, he made two, you know, not want to say aggressive, but assertive moves, one to get the boom through and then one to get the boat back on a low mode, which I think is also important.
Yeah, and I think, Al, the other thing is eyes forward and watching the boat as it turns, but you're also keeping an eye on the spinnaker. And I was just keeping an eye on if the sail was collapsing towards itself like a taco, and then I knew I had to head up, and then watching the leach of the sail at the same time to see if there was a leach curl, and then that would help me quickly make an adjustment to keep the sail full.
Right. We did have one question about, you were talking about the weight placement before, is are you allowed to stick your hand out to hold the kite like you see in some of these videos, provided that you're inside the lifeline?
Yeah, so you can hold your arm out. Your torso has to stay inside the shear of the boat. So, you know, like I said, if your butt's on the deck, if you're sitting on the deck and the lifeline's at your back and you reach out, chances are you're fine. You know, once you start standing up or, you know, sitting up or leaning up against the lifeline without your butt on the deck, then you start getting in trouble. And I think that's way easier to get flagged by a ref for being outside the shear line. So it's way safer just to keep seated on the deck. Right. And you can reach your arm out pretty far and pretty much accomplish what you need to.
Yeah, especially the further aft you are. I see often once they're sailing, the guy holding it out because he's further aft on the boat, then you can actually hold it out further. But that's because he's Tim Healy driving the boat. You know?
I don't know about you guys, but those videos made me want to go sailing in Key West pretty bad.
I know, it looks pretty nice.
Well, speaking of, you know, Key West, what we typically had when we were there is, and this is a typical condition there, right? And this is where, in my opinion, it's actually the hardest mode to sail a J70 is this marginal or lazy planing condition, right? And this is where I think you see the top teams really have a leg up, is that they're able to do this well. So I don't know if Ruairidh wants to talk about this condition here a little bit.
Yeah, the lazy plane. I'm sure lots of people got different names for it, but you're absolutely right. You know, we get to that condition where we're winging or soak mode, where the boat actually becomes a little bit unstable, especially if you're winging. It starts to pendulum from side to side, and that's usually a key of the fact that, you know what, we can actually get this boat planing. Maybe not full noise, absolutely sending it around the ocean, but certainly get it on the plane. You know, I think if you're doing it and you can get your boat speed up over 9 knots and certainly into double figures, then it's generally the VMG mode to be sailing. When you're like that, you know, the boat's accelerating and decelerating quite a lot. So it's quite important that the crew stay very active in moving their weight forwards and back, but always absolutely as far out as they can on the windward side to try and induce some, you know, to create some righting moment. It's certainly no problem to step in slightly if we're looking to head the boat up, but once we're, you know, really trying to make the boat go fast, then it's nice to keep the weight high. Backstay can be on a little bit. It depends whether how soft your rig is. If the rig tension is very loose, then you'd want a little bit more backstay just to stabilize the spinnaker luff and also the forestay in order to make it just stand up on the centerline a bit more. These are conditions where you actually use a little bit more vang than if it was very windy and you're constantly planing, but it's almost certainly a vang ease from the point if you were wing on wing, and then very active on the main sheet in and out, because as I say, the apparent wind angle is changing quite a lot. So I certainly find as a main sheet trimmer downwind, this is the condition where I'm pretty much the most active on the main sheet. You know, it'll go through quite a big range. As the boat slows down for any reason, the sheet goes out a long way as the parent comes aft. We're looking at it'll be sheeting in as we, you know, to help the helmsman come up. And then as we accelerate, sheeting in more and more as the apparent goes forward, the boat comes back down again. So pretty active in all this, and the same with the spinnaker sheet. Pretty close to, you know, pumping conditions to try and induce the boat onto the plane. So yeah, lots to do here. Tim, you got any jam?
Yeah. Well, just looking at the picture here, you can see one crew member is looking back, and the key here is, again, it's the communication. And in these puffy conditions or lazy planing, any difference in velocity, wind speed makes a huge difference. So communicating when the puff's coming, doing a countdown, how strong the puff is, or how big the lull is equally as important, because that's going to signal to the helmsman, you know, when that lull comes, and the crew to adjust their weight when that lull comes, to lean in a little bit, help the helmsman turn up. The helmsman's going to have to turn up aggressively at times to keep the pressure in the sail plan, because that lull might only last a few seconds until the next puff, but to get through it and keep the boat going 9 knots, 10 knots, 11 knots, and not sit back down in 8 or 7 knots back in displacement mode, but to keep lazy planing, it could take an aggressive turn and a little bit of weight in. And that communication, those little adjustments to keep the boat lazy planing when other boats are not and they fall into displacement, are huge, because that next puff, if you can get through to that next puff, all of a sudden you're going 10, 11, 12 knots again. Your apparent goes way forward and you've just taken off. You put 10 boat lengths on that boat that fell off the plane.
Yeah, Tim, I think you're 100% right. And it's funny on the, you know, kind of two stories here. One is, you know, on the Vineyard Vines, one of the things Ben Lamb, who's a tactician on the boat, talks about all the time. He keeps yelling at us, you know, hot deck, meaning like keep moving. And we do a lot of moving fore and aft, and, you know, and keeping the boat on that constant angle heel to make sure we keep it on that plane as long as possible, right? You want to be the last one to fall off.
Yeah.
And it makes a huge difference. This seems to be, in my mind, the one condition where the more active the crew is, even just fore and aft, makes the biggest difference compared to any of the other downwind conditions in my mind.
Yeah. And then, you know, you might find yourself in a situation where you're working too hard, you know, to keep it going 9 knots, you know, and now you're having to stay bow up and move weight in too much. And then at that point, the tactician has to make a call and just say, bow down, displacement mode, jib furls, weight goes all the way forward, and now you're finding your displacement mode. And then from that displacement mode, you could sail that for, you know, 10 seconds. And all of a sudden, tactician says, let's go wing. And he's going to call boom over wing or spinnaker over wing. And that might be the best mode. And that might only last for 30 seconds or a minute. Next thing you know, the next wave of pressure comes, you know, and he says, get ready for bow up, jib out. And you bow up, jib out, everybody hits the rail, you accelerate, and now you're back lazy planing or full-on planing again.
So before we get to the videos, one question, Rory, that we just received is, you know, you're a tactician on the boat, or main trimmer or the spin trimmer. You know, how do you decide whether the jib should be furled or out? What are some of the things you think about in terms of jib in or out?
So I think as soon as you're in any way trying to make the boat plane, you'll want the jib there, and that's because the way the air is moving over the boat. So when you go from either wing or deep soak mode, we're just trying to create drag. So if the jib comes out, it actually sucks a lot of air out of the spinnaker and causes turbulence, which isn't helping us. But as soon as we get some apparent wind over the sail plan, then having the jib in there actually, you know, creates more drive as well. So basically, you know, there's a tendency for people, if they make the change from soak mode or wing to go, no, we're going lazy plane now, just count to 3 or count to 4, 5, or whatever, and then bring the jib out. Bring it out once there is airflow across the sails, you know, and you've actually got some apparent wind generated, but you know, don't rush it to get there because it just makes the spinnaker trimmer's job harder otherwise.
Right. And I think you're right. There's a lot of communication between the spin trimmer and the tactician about the load on the sheet to make that decision, right? And if the person who's calling the breeze says we're going to be in a puff for the next 30 seconds, you might go jib out and bow up and go faster, as Tim was saying. Or if you say there's a big lull coming, the call might be, it's marginal, let's furl the jib and soak low. That might be the.
I think Tim's absolutely right. In this condition, you've got a lot of different modes available to you. So there's a lot of communication needs to be happening inside the boat. There needs to be some analysis on whether your boat is sailing the correct mode versus the fleet. That's probably going to be coming from the tactician or maybe the bowman. But and a lot of concentration from the helm and the spinnaker trimmer, especially on making sure that whatever mode they are choosing to sail, that they're doing it to the best of their ability. So yeah, lots.
So we're gonna play this. We're gonna play this video, and we'll have Tim talk through it. And we did receive a question, Tim. So maybe you can address a little bit in the video. Is about how you set the vang tension when in this lazy planing, or we can address it after the video. But what the vang tension should look like, and how you know if you have too much vang or too little. Some of the tricks of the vang in this mode. But we'll play the video here as well.
Okay.
And it didn't do it, of course.
Okay, so lazy planing conditions, probably about 13 knots of breeze. You know, one thing that we work on is where the crew's supposed to be sitting. So we have, you know, everybody does it differently. I would bring, this is our bow guy, Gordy, who sits behind me. He just moves back. And he's calling the breeze. So he's looking, he's calling the puffs, he's counting down. Jeff Becker's all the way up front, he's trimming, and then Paul Abdullah is doing the main sheet right next to me. So I've got Gordy behind me calling the puffs, so I know exactly when they're coming. I have Paul right there, and I'm calling the pumps with him and main sheet trim, and Jeff Becker is giving me feedback on the spinnaker pressure, and we're communicating on the angle to keep the speed up over that 9 knots, 10 knot range. But the one thing I want to bring up in this video is weight placement, and you can see the winch. You know, that is kind of the divider, that kind of locks you in where you're sitting, and really it's that hop over the winch to get the weight forward again, and you have to be aggressive as soon as you feel like the breeze is dropping a little bit, and you feel like you've got to get the back end of the boat out of the water and get the weight forward some more. You've got to aggressively make that call on the boat, weight forward, and everybody needs to hop over that winch, move one body width forward. And then if the breeze drops any more and you're going displacement mode, you go another body width forward. In this case, Gordy would go, who's in all the way in the back, would go all the way back forward again, and we'd be back in displacement mode. So the idea is be super active with the weight, make sure you hop over that winch, and you've got a good system for moving the weight and communicating to get the weight forward. But yeah, keeping the boat over that 10 knots is everything in this condition.
So Tim, just I froze it here on this shot to show the profile. I just want to go back to the question about the vang, and where Rory can jump in, is how you set it and what adjustments you make with it in this condition, because this is in that marginal plane. You're looking for power, but then you become overpowered, and how you kind of decide what to do with it.
Yeah, so there's two things. Once you get going and you start, you know, getting over 10 knots, the boat frees up. And it's easier to drive, you know, all of a sudden it stabilizes, and that's when you can start pulling the vang on tighter, and you can actually create more power that way, and because you're creating that power, you can sail lower. And so that's the name of the game, is once you start going faster and you create more power, more apparent wind, you sheet the spinnaker tighter, jib will have to come in a little bit, main will have to come in, and then you could put some vang on to create even more power in the mainsail, and the whole boat will, you'll be able to sail lower because of it. Now, you know, the problem is if you have the vang on too much to start out with, the boat becomes really sensitive when those puffs hit, and it's hard to find the right groove or the angle to hit to accelerate. So you have to be careful putting too much vang on to start and to get lazy planing. And that might be one thing to try if you're having a hard time finding that angle. Ease the vang just a little bit. Let the main twist open a little bit. You know, you still have control with your main sheet. You can pull your boom in if you need to create helm, but it allows you to find that groove better and to get up on that lazy plane. And once you start lazy planing and your apparent goes forward, everything starts to become easier. Then you can experiment with more vang on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's another video we can talk about the vang here, I think, coming up. So just to kind of keep moving along here, because we've already hit the 1 hour mark. Let's talk about the best part of J70 sailing in my mind is this flat out planing condition. You know, you get beat up going upwind the whole way for, you know, the downwind leg that takes 2.5 minutes because you're going so fast. But this is, you know, where I think, you know, keeping the boat under control and going fast is key. So I think Ruairidh was going to talk about this part of it too as we go.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, this is the fun bit, right? This is when it's just about, we're not really so worried about depth anymore. We're just trying to get the boat going absolutely fast forward all the time. And the key to that is in maintaining a nice consistent heel angle. There's going to be a little bit more heel than when you're lazy planing. We always aim for around between 8 and 10 degrees. And if you can keep it at that 8 to 10 degrees the whole time, that means your apparent angle is basically staying the same the whole time. And the boat will just, every little gust and wave that comes along, the boat will just accelerate. And it should be relatively easy to sail the boat when it's like that. In order to make it like that, then key part is obviously getting all our weight to windward and as far aft as possible. Keep the bow out so that the bow isn't in any way trying to, if it goes into any waves, it's not trying to steer the boat. So we want it out, as in this picture here. And also what that does is it presents the planing surface at the back of the boat. It gives it a nicer angle to the water to lift the boat out of the water and get it on the plane as often as possible. I personally like to have the traveler in the middle and control it on the main sheet and the vang. That's my preference, but I know that some guys like to have the traveler all the way down so that when they sheet in, when they pump, they get, you know, the movement of the bottom of the sail, but also they close down the head and possibly get a bit more from that. I prefer to keep the head open the whole time so that it doesn't tip the boat over in any way. And the pump really only comes from the sort of bottom half of the main. But, you know, I've seen guys do very well. I think, Tim, you were always an advocate of traveler down, is that right?
Yeah. As soon as we get any kind of planing, I go trav all the way down and all the time.
So we have another one of the videos here of the flat out planing, Tim. This is you sailing here in Key West. It's a pretty short video, I think, but I think you had a couple of points here you wanted to make, and we can talk about it as we go here, and I can play it.
So I think this might have been the first Key West. So this is not. This shows. I think our mainsail trimmer is trimming it right from the boom, which is not the right technique. And you can see the boom's high. There's way too much twist. And it's just not the right technique. So, you know, soon after this, we figured out, you know, the trimmer should be trimming it through the block and on the deck on the Traveler. And then, soon after that, we went to Traveler all the way downwind. So, I forget where, Allan, you found this video, but he wanted to point out how this was not the right way to do it. And
well, I think it kind of shows to me, obviously the leach profiles look like they match pretty well, but you can see there's a couple parts where the boat's probably starved for power. And I think it's what you're saying, what both you and Rory are saying is how to get the middle to bottom part of the sail to work without having the top be too twisted off. And you can see like the middle of the sail is just not really doing as much probably as you would like it to at times, right?
Yeah, it's almost right by the numbers. It's almost luffing at times. And
right.
It's just extreme twist. But, the other point is, we've come a long way with the J70. This was the first big regatta that year in Key West. And, the techniques and the little things we've learned here and there makes such a huge difference. And this is just an example of, learning how to sail a boat and just trying to figure it out as we go.
Yeah, it's amazing looking at this video now, because I remember that was when half of us were at that regatta with only 3 people on the boat, and now there's people sailing with 5. So, it's definitely changed a lot since then. But some of the lessons that are still, really important here. So we have one other video here, and this is actually Rory. I think he's driving this boat. Kind of shows some more of this flat out planing conditions. Rory, if you want to talk us through, once again, I fumbled it. What you see here in this video, it's a short one, but.
Yeah, no, I think this was just an example. I think earlier on, the other video was in Key West where there was a very short chop. So in a very twisty setup, allowed to keep the bow up more and keep the bow out of the chop. Whereas I think this was the Newport Worlds, the first Worlds, and there was a much longer sea state. So this was much more a case of just getting your weight back, maximum power from the sail plan, weight back and to windward, and then just having the ability to be able to sail around some of these much larger waves. You see, you don't really need to pump the sails that much if you can be accurate with your steering and have a setup that allows you a range of angles that you can steer without massively overpowering or underpowering the boat. Then the helmsman's got the ability to sort of sail around and just keep the boat fizzing along nicely. I think where you've frozen it there does show that, back in those days, we didn't have the umpires quite so hot in terms of weight positioning, but guy at the back of the boat probably, this is my tactician, Ben Field. He was probably because I'm leaning on him, to be honest, but you got to be careful with your positioning. As soon as you're standing up downwind these days, you're vulnerable. So since then, I'm much more of an advocate of all 4 guys sitting down, and then if you're sitting down, you're pretty squeaky clean.
Yeah, I fully agree. And the couple of things I take away is you can see the jib is working on the bottom, but the top of the sail could potentially be luffing, to make sure the spinnaker has enough flow there. And even here, the spinnaker does have some curl in it, because if you over trim it, the boat just doesn't tend to release at all, is what I feel like. And then, one of the things that seems to happen when it's windy, and I don't know if it's because the poles bend or what happens, is the tack line kind of tends to go up. And I know Tim was talking earlier about one of the tricks he has for getting the tack line all the way down. I don't know if you want to run through that, Tim, real quick.
Yeah, I think it's fairly common among the some of the top teams, but one thing we learned a couple years ago is to get that tack down, instead of having 2 guys try to pull on it and time it with easing, is you can actually run the tack line to the opposite side of the cockpit to the jib cleat and step on it like a banjo, and that'll create enough leverage that one crew member can take a second, go in, lock it into that opposite side jib cleat, and just jump on it and pop the tack down all the way. Because what happens is in breezy conditions, you pull it to your mark, you set the kite, and then, even if you have a second before it fills to get it down a little bit more, it'll fill, it'll create all this load, and then the line might stretch a little bit, but also the pole is going to bend at the same time. So now all of a sudden you've created a couple inches off the end of the pole, like you can see in this picture. And ideally, when it's windy like this, you want a nice tight luff. So back stays on, keeping the rig back, and you should have the halyard up all the way and the tack down all the way. And that'll create a nice tight luff, which will keep a flatter spinnaker shape. It'll keep the draft of the sail forward. It'll be more efficient for heavy air, basically.
Okay, couple last questions here before we wrap this up. So one of the questions we have is for you guys when you're driving, and I guess even if you're trimming, is what do you guys feel in this condition before the boat wipes out? Like what are some of the signs the boat's about to wipe out for you guys when you're on the boat?
It's just maximum helm. So there's a certain amount of helm that you get, weather helm, that you get and before it cavitates. And the tricky part is you would like to load up the sail plan so you're sailing with close to maximum helm, and you are actually going the fastest and you're sailing the deepest. And I think Rory made a comment earlier about being able to trim the spinnaker in and also trim the main in and increase the pressure in the main to balance the best you can to balance out the kite, but also you're increasing the helm and you're riding this kind of razor's edge. And at that point, and you may also be pulling the vang on a little bit. And at this point, you're sailing as fast forward as you can, but also you're able to sail as low as you can. And that's the tricky part, is to have somebody on the vang so that the helmsman feels that maximum, gets to that point where he's starting to feel the maximum helm. And if you get a wave, like you can see in this picture we're looking at, if you get a wave that hits you on the back stern and rocks you up a little bit, the helmsman has to say ease vang, and the vang comes off immediately, because if it doesn't, then that wave will all of a sudden create this cascading effect where your rudder cavitates and now he has no control and the boat just spins up out of control. So somebody has to be really quick on the vang. Also, the main sheet trimmer at this point, same thing. I communicate by saying ease, ease, ease to the trimmer, because that's the gross tune, right? And if his eases aren't helping anymore, then I'll scream vang and the vang will come off. I hope that answers the question.
I look at the question there, and it's any tips on what's it going to feel like just before. And what I like to know is whether, when you're sailing along, what you think is VMG and you think you're on the edge, is do you still have steerage? So if you pull the helm towards you a little bit, does the boat bear away? If the boat doesn't bear away, then you are right on the edge. And in pulling the helm towards you, all it's done is start to cavitate the rudder a little bit. So if you're that close, then you've got to, you're in a position where the next thing you're going to have to do is lose some power. Ideally, at that stage, as Tim said, if you can catch it early and get rid of some power from the back of the boat by either easing the vang or easing the main sheet, then you've got a chance that you'll get flow back around the rudder very quickly, and you'll all of a sudden the boat will turn, it'll bear away, and you'll get going again. If that doesn't happen, then Tim's absolutely right that the next call is for the spinnaker trimmer just to give a foot or half a meter or whatever of spinnaker sheet ease, maybe not even that much, and it would just get rid of quite a lot of power, and you might catch it early. If the boat starts to turn up more, and no matter how much you pull the helm, it starts to turn up, then you're in a position where you're in trouble. Your one saving grace is you might put the helm back into the middle. It's a bit counterintuitive, but get flow back around the rudder, and then try and steer again. You sort of jolt it into the center line and back towards you. If that doesn't happen, if you've done all that and you're still not bearing away, then pretty good chance you're going to have a quick wind check.
Yeah, and I think, Rory, I was going to say, I think the one thing to make sure you don't do is if you're trying to bear out, just pull the tiller toward you and hold it. if nothing's happening, you got to move the rudder to reattach flow. Just kind of angling it at 8 degrees and hoping the boat will catch and bear off isn't going to work, right? You have to kind of force the rudder to reattach before you get to the part where you wipe out. And there's not a lot of time for that. There's not a big difference in time, but if you feel that sensation, you got to like pump the tiller a little bit to force it to get some flow back, I think.
Yeah, get some clean flow on the rudder. Yeah, absolutely.
So Tim, but before we wrap this up, we had one question earlier, and I think now would be a good time because that would be a good way to segue our way out of here is, so we have two spinnakers, the AirX version and the Dynacode version. One of the folks were asking, you know, is there a reason to choose one over the other? And, you know, being that they're both the AP1, which one you choose?
Yeah, so AirX spinnaker is starting to become more popular. So I think we sell more of those now than the Dynacode. But generally speaking, the AirX is a stiffer material, so it stretches less. And there's good and bad to that. So the good part is in this condition, you know, we're looking at here on the video, is less stretch is better because it keeps a flatter sail shape. Any pumping that happens gets translated quickly to the boat and accelerates the boat. You know, generally in the big puffs, it won't distort and change shape as quickly as a Dynacode. Now, if we went back to the beginning of this discussion, we showed some videos of light air sailing. Now that video we showed of the choppy, you know, swell on chop light air sailing where the whole sail plane was bouncing around. Now that condition I would say is a Dynacode condition because the Dynacode is a little stretchier. It absorbs that shock better. And because it absorbs that shock, it actually keeps the flow attached to the spinnaker longer. And that flow in that condition across the spinnaker is everything. That creates the power. So if the sail is stiff and it's shaking the wind or the flow out of the spinnaker, you're losing your power. If you can keep it attached longer in that condition, you're going to have more power. You'll be able to sail faster.
Got it. Well, thank you guys. We're going to wrap this up here. We've done an hour and 15 minutes. So for anybody who has any questions, feel free to email any one of the three of us. We're glad to help out, or anyone on the North Sales team for that matter. But we're really glad that you guys came here and spoke with us. We're going to take a week off, I believe, on J70 Mondays, and we'll let you guys know what the plan is after that, what we're going to be back to. So if you guys have any suggestions, even on topics or questions you want us to address, shoot us a note. And we hope everyone has a great week and stays safe and healthy out there, and say hi to your friends and family as you can. And we'll be back with you soon. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Allan.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Have a good evening.